Before we get into this one, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever hiked the Cascades, any part of them, Washington, Oregon, doesn't matter, leave a comment and tell me which trail. Tell me if you camped overnight. And if you heard anything out there you couldn't explain, I especially want to hear about that. Subscribe if you're new. This channel doesn't do clickbait, and it doesn't do fiction. A former Forest Service ranger contacted me through a mutual friend about 3 weeks ago. He worked the North Cascades district for 11 years. He still works there. He asked me not to use his real name, but everything else is exactly how he told it. Here's his account. My name is Rowan. I'm 38 years old. I've been a wilderness ranger with the U.S. Forest Service for 11 years, all of them spent in the same district of the North Cascades in Washington state. I've pulled hypothermic hikers out of snow basins at 9,000 feet. I've carried out the remains of a 16-year-old boy who fell from a scramble route his parents had no business letting him attempt. I've tracked lost hunters through drainage systems so thick with undergrowth that you move 30 feet in an hour and consider it good progress. I know these mountains. I know what lives here. I know what sounds the animals make, what the wind does when it funnels through the valleys at night, how a creek sounds different from rainfall if you've listened to both for long enough. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe didn't come from ignorance. It didn't come from panic. It didn't come from inexperience or a bad night's sleep or too many campfire stories. In 11 years, my district has logged 106 search and rescue operations. 89 of those had outcomes I could explain. Car accidents on forest roads, dehydration, falls, exposure, 1 lightning strike, 17 did not. 17 people entered the backcountry through trailheads we monitor, signed the registers, followed established routes, and then simply stopped being findable. Not dead, not that we could prove. Not injured on a ledge somewhere waiting for a helicopter. Gone. Packs found on trails with food still in them. Boots placed neatly beside a creek with no footprints leading away. A tent still zipped from the inside with nobody in it and no other exit. I used to think those cases had rational explanations we hadn't found yet. River crossings gone wrong, bodies carried downstream into gorges we couldn't access, animal predation, people who wanted to disappear and were smart enough to do it. I don't think that anymore. When I transferred to this district at 27, I'd already done 2 years with the Forest Service in Colorado and a year of seasonal work in Montana before that. I had a degree in wildlife biology from Oregon State. I'd completed my EMT certification, Wilderness First Responder, and Swift Water Rescue. I wasn't green. I wasn't naive. I was confident, maybe arrogantly so, that I understood how wilderness worked. The reason I requested a transfer was personal. My younger brother, Theo, had died 8 months earlier. Climbing accident in the Tetons. He was 23. The protection system failed. A cam walked out of a crack nobody inspected closely enough, and he took a 70-foot ground fall. He died on impact. I wasn't there. I was 3 states away, working a controlled burn in the Gunnison, and by the time I got the call, Theo had been dead for 6 hours. I don't talk about this often. I'm talking about it now because you need to understand what I carried into these mountains, because the mountains learned what I was carrying, and they used it. The transfer put me at the Mineral Creek Station, a small compound of 3 structures, a ranger cabin, a maintenance shed, and a radio relay building, situated about 14 miles up a fire road from the nearest paved highway. The station served as the primary operations base for roughly 200 square miles of designated wilderness, most of it above 4,000 feet, much of it above the tree line. In summer, we ran 2 rangers out of Mineral Creek. In winter, 1. I arrived in late September, which meant I had about 3 weeks of overlap with the outgoing ranger before I'd be alone until May. The outgoing ranger was a man named Dale Pressler. He was 56. He'd worked the district for 22 years. He had a gray beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed deliberately since the Clinton administration, a voice like gravel being poured into a coffee can, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like he was reading the serial number stamped on the inside of your skull. I liked him immediately. He reminded me of every veteran I'd ever worked under, competent in a way that didn't need to announce itself. He showed me the station, the equipment, the radio protocols, the patrol routes, all standard, all normal. It was on my third evening that Dale sat me down at the table in the cabin, put 2 mugs of black coffee between us, and slid a folded piece of paper across the surface. "Read this," he said. I unfolded it. The paper was soft from handling, creased and recreased so many times that the folds were translucent. It was handwritten in blue ink, not Dale's handwriting, I'd later learn, but that of a ranger named Carla Brask who'd worked the district in the 90s. Other hands had added notes in the margins, some in pencil, some in red pen. One annotation was in handwriting so small I needed a flashlight to read it. The paper was a list, 7 items. I'll tell you what they said. I've memorized them. Every ranger who works this district memorizes them because you don't carry the paper into the field. If you lose it out there and someone finds it, they'll have questions nobody wants to answer. Rule 1. If you hear a voice calling from the tree line after dark, human or animal, do not respond. Do not acknowledge it. Do not look toward the sound. Continue your patrol or return to the station. If it calls your name, the urgency is greater. Still, do not respond. Rule 2. Between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m., do not leave the cabin for any reason. If the radio activates during this window with a distress call, log the call, but do not respond until after 4 a.m. Real emergencies will still be emergencies at 4. Rule 3. If you find footprints on a trail that lead in one direction only, toward the interior and never returning, do not follow them. Mark the location, note the date, and report to district. Do not search for the person who made them. Rule 4. If wildlife in your immediate area goes completely silent, no birds, no insects, no movement, leave the area on foot. Do not run. Walk at a steady pace toward the station or your vehicle. Do not stop until the ambient sound returns. Rule 5. Do not enter the drainage basin east of Thompson Ridge between October and April. There is no official closure. There is no trail. There's no reason to go there. Do not go there. Rule 6. If you find personal belongings, packs, clothing, gear, placed neatly along a trail with no sign of distress or struggle, photograph them, note the GPS coordinates, and leave them exactly where they are. Do not touch them. Do not move them. Do not open packs to search for identification. Rule 7. If during a night patrol you see a figure standing at the tree line that does not move when you illuminate it with your flashlight, turn off the flashlight. Walk backward toward your vehicle or the station. Do not turn your back on it until you are inside a structure or a vehicle with the doors closed. I read the list twice. Then I looked at Dale. Is this a hazing thing? Dale didn't smile. Dale, as I would learn over the next 3 weeks, almost never smiled. Does this feel like a hazing thing to you, Rowan? It feels like someone had a bad experience and decided to write a campfire story about it. Carla Brask wrote that list in 1996, Dale said. She worked this district for 9 years. Before her was a man named Len Wellett, who worked it for 14. Before him, a woman named Jackie Farrow, who worked it for 3 before requesting reassignment to a desk position in Bellingham. Carla didn't write the list from scratch. She compiled it from what Len told her, what Jackie told Len, and what Jackie learned from the ranger before her, whose name I don't know, because Jackie never said it and nobody thought to ask before she stopped returning calls. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. Every person on that chain added something. The note about Rule 2, the one about the radio, that's Len's handwriting. He added it after the winter of '89. The annotation on Rule 5, the one you need a flashlight to read, that's mine. I added it in 2011. What happened in 2011? Dale looked at me for a long time. I mean a long time, maybe 15 seconds, which doesn't sound like much until someone is staring at you across a table in a cabin 14 miles from the nearest human being, and the forest outside is turning black. Follow the rules, he said. That's what I need you to do. Follow them every day, every patrol, every night. Don't test them. Don't rationalize exceptions. Don't convince yourself that your education or your experience makes you immune to what happens when someone doesn't follow them. Dale? 47 people have gone missing in this district since the Forest Service started keeping reliable records in 1971. 47. Not all of them were hikers. 2 were rangers. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, exactly. More like the feeling you get when you realize the floor you're standing on is thinner than you thought. Who were the Rangers? One was before my time, 1983. A man named Peter Cowell. He went out on a night patrol in November and never came back. They found his truck on a fire road with the engine still running and the driver's door open. No tracks leading away from the vehicle. None. And the other? Dale finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, set it upside down on the dish rack. His back was to me, and I watched his shoulders settle, the way a man's shoulders settle when he's decided to carry something he'd rather set down. Her name was Marnie Soto. She was my partner. Not work partner, partner. We'd been together for 6 years. She transferred out here to be with me. She was smarter than me, better in the field, better with people. She's the one who figured out that Rule 4 was about silence specifically, that the absence of sound was the warning, not any particular sound. He turned around. His face was exactly the same as before, steady, controlled. March 2011, she went to check on a report of a downed tree blocking a fire road. Routine. She radioed in when she arrived. She radioed again 40 minutes later saying the tree was cleared. Then she radioed a third time, about an hour after that, and said, he paused. She said, Dale, I think I hear Len. Len Willett had been dead for 2 years by then. Heart attack in Bellingham. She knew he was dead. She'd been at his funeral. What did you do? I told her to come back to the station. I told her not to respond to whatever she was hearing. She said she understood. She said she was getting in the truck. He leaned against the counter. She never arrived. I found the truck on the fire road, right where she said she'd be. Engine off. Keys on the seat. Door closed. Not locked, just closed. Her pack was in the passenger seat, radio on top. Her boots were on the floor mat, both of them, placed neatly, side by side, like she'd taken them off before getting out of the vehicle. He looked at me. No tracks, no sign of struggle, no evidence of animal activity, nothing. The search lasted 9 days. Dogs couldn't pick up a trail. SR teams covered every drainage within 5 miles. Nothing. I didn't know what to say. I don't think there was anything to say. The annotation I added to Rule 5, Dale said. It says, she heard it here. The fire road she was on runs along the east side of Thompson Ridge, right above the drainage. That night, I lay in my bunk in the cabin and listened to the forest outside. I'd spent hundreds of nights in wilderness, thousands probably. I knew the sounds, the way Douglas firs creak in wind, the skitter of rodents on a roof, the distant yipping of coyotes working a drainage. Normal sounds, sounds with sources I could name. But that night, I listened differently. I listened for the spaces between the sounds. I listened for silence. I didn't hear anything unusual. Not that first night. My first 2 weeks at Mineral Creek were aggressively normal. I ran patrols, I checked trail conditions, I hauled a fallen hemlock off a segment of the Pacific Crest Trail with a crosscut saw and a lot of profanity. I fixed a leaking pipe in the maintenance shed. I talked to the handful of late-season hikers still moving through the backcountry and reminded them that the weather window was closing and they should be thinking about getting below the snow line. Dale stayed for those 2 weeks, overlapping with me, showing me the rhythms of the station. He was methodical and patient. He showed me which radio repeaters went down in wind, which trails washed out first in heavy rain, where the best line of sight was for satellite phone calls. Standard ranger-to-ranger handoff stuff. But underneath the normal instruction, there was a second curriculum. Dale was teaching me the rules, not lecturing, not quizzing me, just modeling behavior. I'd notice him glance at his watch at 1:45 a.m. and quietly check the door locks. I'd see him pause on a trail and tilt his head, listening. And when I asked what he'd heard, he'd say, making sure I can still hear things. I watched him come across a day pack sitting in the middle of a trail connector. Decent pack, probably a $150 piece of equipment, just sitting there with its straps arranged in a way that looked almost deliberate. And he pulled out his camera, photographed it from 4 angles, logged the GPS, and walked around it without touching it. Someone's going to come back for that, I said. No, they're not. He said it the way you'd say the sun sets in the west, not arguing, just correcting an error in my model of how things worked. On his last evening before driving out, Dale and I sat on the porch of the cabin. It was mid-October. The light was that particular amber that the Cascades get in autumn, when the angle of the sun turns everything into a painting you'd never believe was real. The larch trees on the upper ridges had gone gold, and the valleys below us were filling with the first serious fog of the season. "You'll be alone starting tomorrow," Dale said. "District will check in by radio every morning at 0800. If you miss 2 consecutive check-ins, they'll send someone up the road. Satellite phone is for emergencies. You've got enough provisions for 3 months, but resupply runs down the mountain every 6 weeks if the road stays open." "I'll be fine, Dale." "I know you'll be fine. You're competent. That's not what worries me." "What worries you?" He was quiet for a moment. A Stellar's jay screamed somewhere in the canopy. Normal, expected. I was already cataloging sounds. "The thing about this place," Dale said slowly, "is that it's patient. It doesn't come at you fast. It doesn't announce itself. You'll go weeks, maybe months, without anything that violates your understanding of how the world works. And during those weeks, you'll start to feel stupid for taking the rules seriously. You'll start thinking Dale was a burned-out old man who spent too many winters alone. You'll think Carla was paranoid. You'll think the list is folklore." He looked at me. "That's when it starts. Not when you're afraid. When you stop being afraid." Dale left the next morning at dawn. I stood on the porch and watched his truck disappear down the fire road, trailing dust in the early light, and then there was nothing but the sound of the forest and the quiet awareness that I was the only human being for 14 miles in any direction. I followed the rules. I want to be clear about that. From day one, alone, I followed them. Not because I believed, not yet, but because I respected Dale enough to honor his instructions until I had a reason not to. Professional courtesy. The same way you'd follow a veteran's advice about a river crossing even if you thought you knew a better route. You trust experience first. You form your own opinions later. October was quiet. November was quiet. I fell into the rhythm of the station. Morning radio check, patrol rotation, equipment maintenance, weather logging. The days got shorter. The fog got thicker. Rain turned to sleet, turned to the first dustings of snow on the upper ridges. The last hikers left the backcountry. I was alone. It was December 9th. I know the exact date because I logged it, when something happened that I couldn't explain. I was on a day patrol, mid-morning, following a trail that loops through old-growth forest at about 3,800 feet. Standard route. I'd walked it maybe 20 times already. The trail follows a creek for about 2 miles before climbing a switchback to a ridgeline viewpoint. I was at the creek section about a mile in when the sound stopped. Not faded, not diminished. Stopped. Like someone had pressed mute on the entire forest. The creek was still running. Water doesn't care about rules, but everything else, every bird, every insect, every rustle of a creature in the underbrush, every creak of wood in the canopy above me, gone. Absolute biological silence. Rule 4. My body reacted before my conscious mind finished processing. I stopped walking. I oriented myself toward the station, back the way I'd come, roughly northwest, and I started walking. Steady pace, not running. My hand went to my radio out of instinct, but I didn't transmit. I just walked. The silence lasted for 11 minutes. I timed it. 11 minutes of walking through a forest that sounded like a museum after hours. My boots on the trail, the creek fading behind me. My own breathing, which I was keeping controlled through an old technique from my EMT training. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. At 11 minutes, a varied thrush called from somewhere to my left. Then another. Then the background hum of the forest faded back in like someone was slowly turning up a volume knob. Fir branches creaking, a woodpecker hammering, the ambient rustle of wind through undergrowth. I stopped, stood there, waited until my heart rate came down. Nothing had happened. That was the thing. Nothing had appeared. Nothing had chased me. Nothing had called my name. The forest had simply gone quiet, and I had left and the forest had returned to normal. But my hands were shaking. Not a lot. Just enough that I noticed when I reached for my water bottle. I'd been in situations that should have been more frightening than this. A ground blizzard above 10,000 feet in Colorado. A river crossing where I lost my footing and went under for about 8 seconds that felt like 8 years. My hands hadn't shaken then. They were shaking now because some part of me, some part deeper than training or logic, understood that the silence wasn't a natural event. It was a response. Something had been there, and the forest had reacted to its presence the way the ocean reacts to a shark, by clearing out. I went back to the station. I sat at the table. I looked at the folded piece of paper that I'd kept in the breast pocket of my jacket since Dale had given it to me. Rule 4. If wildlife in your immediate area goes completely silent, leave the area on foot. I'd followed the rule. I was fine. Everything was fine. I made coffee. I logged the incident. Location, time, duration, conditions. I noted the temperature, the wind speed, the cloud cover. I was thorough because being thorough is how I process things I don't understand. You record the data. You look for patterns. You build a framework. That was the last fully normal week I had at Mineral Creek. 4 days after the silence event, I was doing an evening patrol on the fire road that runs along the station's western perimeter. It was about 4:30 p.m., which in mid-December in the North Cascades means the light is already failing. The sky was a bruise, dark purple along the ridgeline, fading to a sick yellow near the horizon where the last of the sun was bleeding out behind the mountains. Fog was pooling in the lower elevations. The temperature was hovering right around freezing. I was driving slowly, scanning the road edges for washouts or fallen debris, when my headlights caught something on the trail that branches off the fire road toward Thompson Ridge. Footprints, fresh ones, pressed into the thin layer of wet snow that had fallen the night before. Boot prints, adult-sized, heading east, toward the interior, toward the drainage below Thompson Ridge. I stopped the truck and got out, crouched next to the prints. They were clean, well-defined, made within the last few hours before the snow had a chance to soften and blur the edges. Size 10 or 11, lug sole pattern consistent with a standard hiking boot. I followed them with my eyes as far as I could see. They led straight down the trail, spaced evenly, steady gait. No sign of stumbling, no sign of stopping. Just a person walking with purpose into the backcountry in December at elevation as darkness was falling. I almost followed them. My training said, someone is out there in conditions that will kill them overnight if they're not prepared. My duty said, find them, assess their condition, bring them back or call for evacuation. Then I looked more carefully. The prints only went one direction, into the wilderness. There were no prints coming out. No prints approaching the trailhead from the fire road. No tire tracks from a parked vehicle. No indication that whoever made these prints had arrived by any means I could identify. They simply began at the trail junction, mid-stride, as if the person had materialized walking, and continued east without interruption. Rule 3. I stood up. My knees were stiff from crouching. I looked down the trail one more time. The prints disappeared into the fog about 40 yards out, where the trail curved around a stand of mountain hemlock, and beyond that, I could see nothing. I took out my camera, photographed the prints from multiple angles, logged the GPS coordinates, noted the date, the time, the conditions. Then I got back in my truck, and I drove to the station, and I did not go back. That night, I sat in the cabin with the wood stove popping and the windows dark, and I thought about those footprints. I thought about how they started from nothing. I thought about how they led toward the Thompson Ridge drainage, the place Rule 5 told me never to go. I thought about Marnie Soto hearing a dead man's voice on the fire road above that same drainage. I thought about calling Dale. His number was taped to the wall above the radio. But what would I say? I found footprints. I heard silence. These were not emergencies. These were data points that didn't fit my model, and I was a scientist by training, which meant I didn't discard data just because it was inconvenient. I opened my patrol log and wrote down everything: dates, times, sensory details, GPS coordinates, weather conditions. Then I wrote something at the bottom that surprised me even as I was writing it. I think the rules are real. I don't know what that means yet. I locked the cabin, I checked the windows, I stayed in my bunk until morning. Nothing happened that night, but I lay awake until almost 1 a.m. listening. And just before I finally drifted off, I heard something that wasn't in the rules. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't silence. It was more like a pressure. The feeling you get in your ears when you descend in altitude too fast, a heaviness in the air, as if the atmosphere outside the cabin had thickened. as if something very large was standing very close, displacing the space around it. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then it passed, and the normal nighttime sounds of the forest resumed, and I told myself it was a weather front moving through. I almost believed it. The next morning, I did my radio check at 8 a.m. as usual. District confirmed my signal. I reported routine conditions. I did not mention the silence event, the footprints, or the pressure. I wasn't ready to say those things out loud to someone who would ask follow-up questions I couldn't answer. But after the check-in, I did something I hadn't done before. I pulled out the folded paper and read the rules again, all 7 of them. Then, I read the annotations in the margins. Dale's tiny handwriting, Len's penciled notes, the additions from hands I'd never shake. And I noticed something I'd missed before. In the bottom corner of the paper, in handwriting so faint it might have been written with a nearly dead pen, was an 8th line. Not a rule, more like a note, a warning. It said, "The rules are not complete. They update them when they learn something new. So does it." I didn't know whose handwriting it was. It wasn't Dale's, it wasn't Carla's. I'd seen enough of her writing to recognize it. This was someone else, someone who had held this paper, read these rules, survived long enough to add a thought, and then, what? Passed it on, left the district, disappeared? I folded the paper and put it back in my jacket. I laced my boots. I stepped outside into a morning so cold and clear and beautiful, it hurt to look at. The kind of morning where the Cascades look like they were carved from crystal, and the sky is so blue it barely seems real. I started my patrol, and somewhere in the drainage below Thompson Ridge, where I would not go, where the rules told me never to go, something was waiting. I couldn't see it, I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it, the way you feel someone watching you through a window. A weight in the air, a direction the silence came from. It knew I was here. It had known since I arrived. I was only just beginning to understand what that meant. Christmas came and went. I didn't celebrate it. I heated a can of beef stew, called my parents on the satellite phone for 12 minutes of conversation that felt like speaking through a wall, and went to bed early. My mother asked if I was eating enough. My father asked about the weather. Neither of them asked about Theo. We'd all learned, separately and without discussing it, that Theo's name was a door none of us could open without falling through the floor behind it. January was brutal. 3 feet of snow in the first week alone. The fire road became impassable below the 6-mile marker, which meant I was genuinely cut off. No resupply, no visitors, no way out except on snowshoes, which would take the better part of a day to reach the highway. The radio was my lifeline. District checked in every morning. I confirmed I was alive. They confirmed the weather forecast. We exchanged information the way astronauts exchange telemetry. Precise, functional, devoid of warmth. I followed the rules, every day, every patrol, every night. By January, I'd stopped thinking of them as rules and started thinking of them as physics. You don't decide whether to obey gravity, you just do. The rules were the same. They described conditions of the environment I worked in, and I operated within them, because the alternative was not something I was willing to test. But the environment was testing me. It started with the radio. January 14th, 2:47 a.m. I know the time because the clock on the radio console was the first thing I looked at when the static woke me. The radio was on. I always left it on, tuned to the district frequency. But what was coming through wasn't the normal background hiss of an open channel. It was structured static, patterned, almost rhythmic, like breathing. Then a voice. "Ranger Station, this is... need assistance. Injured on the... please respond." A woman's voice, broken by interference, but clear enough to parse. A standard distress call. The kind of transmission I'd responded to dozens of times in my career. I was on my feet before I was fully awake, my hand reaching for the transmit button, my training overriding everything else. Someone was hurt. Someone needed help. That was the job. My fingers touched the button, then I looked at the clock. 2:47 a.m., Rule 2. Between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m., do not leave the cabin for any reason. If the radio activates during this window with a distress call, log the call but do not respond until after 4 a.m. I pulled my hand back. The voice came again, clearer this time, as if the signal was strengthening. as if whatever was transmitting was moving closer. Please, I can see your light. I'm on the fire road. My leg is broken. Please, I can see your light. She could see my light. The cabin had a porch light that I left on at night, visible from the fire road if you were within a quarter mile of the station. If someone was actually out there with a broken leg in January, in 3 feet of snow, they would die before morning. Hypothermia. 4 hours was too long to wait. I stood in the middle of the cabin, barefoot on the cold wood floor, and I listened. Please, please respond. I can't feel my hands anymore. Please. The voice was afraid, genuinely afraid. The kind of fear I'd heard from real people in real emergencies. The wavering pitch, the shallow breathing between words, the way the sentences got shorter as panic compressed them. I picked up my patrol log. I wrote down the time, the frequency, the content of the transmission. My handwriting was steady. My pulse was not. Then I sat down at the table and I waited. The transmissions continued for 43 minutes. I timed every one. They became more desperate, more detailed. She gave a name, Rachel. She said she'd been hiking the PCT southbound and had fallen on ice. She described injuries that were medically plausible, a tib-fib fracture, lacerations on her hands from catching herself. She knew terminology. She sounded real. At 3:30, the voice changed. Not the content, not the words, the quality. Something in the resonance shifted, as if the signal was coming from a different distance or through a different medium. The words were still right, but the spaces between them were wrong, too even, too measured, like someone reading a script they'd memorized rather than speaking from pain. "Rowan," it said. "Rowan, I know you're listening. I can hear you breathing." I hadn't transmitted. The microphone was off. There was no way to hear me through a closed radio channel. "Rowan, please, it's so cold. You know what cold does to a person. You've seen it. Please don't let me die out here." At 3:41, it said something that emptied the air from my lungs. "Rowan, it's okay. Theo says it's okay. He says you can come out." I stood up from the table so fast the chair fell over behind me. My hands were fists. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached. It knew his name. It knew my brother's name. The voice continued, but I'd stopped listening to the words. I was listening to the architecture of the transmission, the cadence, the pauses, the way it used Theo's name like a key it was trying in a lock, testing, probing, seeing which combination would open the door. At 4 a.m. exactly, the radio went silent. Not a gradual fade, a clean cutoff, like a switch being thrown. I waited 10 minutes. Then I put on my boots, my jacket, my headlamp. I took a flashlight and my sidearm, a .357 revolver that I carried for bears and that I knew, in my gut, would do absolutely nothing against whatever had been on that radio. I opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. The snow was undisturbed. 3 feet of clean white, unbroken from the cabin steps to the fire road, from the fire road to the tree line. No footprints, no tracks, no sign that any living thing had been within 100 yards of the station. No one had been out there. No one named Rachel. No one with a broken leg. No one who could see my light. I went back inside. I locked the door. I sat at the table until dawn, and I did not sleep. I called Dale the next morning. His number was taped to the wall, and I'd been staring at it for hours, and I was done pretending I didn't need to hear his voice. He answered on the third ring. I told him everything. The silence in December, the footprints, the pressure, the radio. I told him about the name, about Theo. Dale was quiet for a long time after I finished. "It used a personal name," he said, not a question, a calibration. "My brother's name. My dead brother's name." "How long have you been at the station?" "Almost 4 months. It took longer with me, almost a year before it got personal. Carla said it was 3 months for her." He paused. "It's getting faster, or it's getting better." "Dale, what is it?" "I don't know. I worked that district for 22 years, and I don't know. Carla didn't know. Len didn't know. Jackie Farrow, who was apparently an extremely intelligent woman, wrote 100 pages of notes trying to figure it out and concluded that she didn't have the right framework. She said it was like trying to describe a color that doesn't exist using a vocabulary built for colors that do. That's not helpful. No, it's not, but it's honest, and honest is what's going to keep you alive. He told me to keep logging everything. He told me to maintain my routines. He told me that the radio incidents would probably escalate. They had with him, they had with Carla, and that the escalation would track my emotional state. The more it learned about what I cared about, the more ammunition it would have. Don't give it new material, he said. Don't talk about your family out loud at the station. Don't look at photographs where it might, I know this sounds insane, where it might see them. Keep your grief private. Keep your memories locked down. You think it can see inside the cabin? I think the distinction between inside and outside is not as reliable as we'd like to believe. Before he hung up, he said one more thing. Joe. Rowan. The rules are a framework, not a fortress. They'll keep you alive if you follow them, but they were written by people who survived specific encounters. There will be things that happen that the rules don't cover. When that happens, you write a new rule. You add it to the list. That's how the list got built. Not by someone sitting down and imagining dangers, by people living through things nobody imagined and writing down what they learned so the next person wouldn't have to learn it the same way. I thanked him. He told me to call any time. I could hear the television in the background, the mundane sounds of a retired man's apartment, and I envied him so sharply it felt like a physical ache. February, the worst month. The radio incidents continued, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always beginning with a plausible distress call and gradually shedding its disguise as the hours wore on. Sometimes it used the woman's voice, Rachel, who I'd started thinking of with a capital letter, like a character in a story I was trapped inside. Sometimes it used other voices. A child once, crying, saying they were lost. A man with an authoritative tone claiming to be from District Dispatch, ordering me to respond. I logged every transmission. I never responded. On February 6th, it used Theo's voice, not a reference to Theo, not someone else saying his name, his voice, Theo's actual voice. The slightly nasal quality he'd had since breaking his nose in a high school lacrosse game, the way he dropped the ends of his sentences, the specific rhythm of his speech that I'd heard every day for 23 years and then never again. Rowan? Hey man, it's me. I know this is weird, but I'm out here. I'm right outside, and I need you to open the door. I was sitting at the table. My patrol log was open in front of me. My pen was in my hand, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My entire body had locked up because the voice coming from the radio was so perfectly, impossibly, devastatingly accurate that for one fractured second, I believed it. Not rationally. Deeper than that. In the part of my brain that still listened for his voice in crowds, that still turned when someone who sounded like him laughed in a grocery store, that still expected him to call on Sunday nights the way he used to. Ro, come on, open up. I'm freezing out here. You're not going to leave me out here, are you? Ro. His nickname for me. Since we were kids, nobody else called me that. Nobody alive knew he called me that. I put down the pen. I stood up. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the handle. And then, and I don't know how to explain this except to say it, I felt him. Not the thing outside. Theo. The real Theo. Or whatever fragment of him still lived in my nervous system, in the muscle memory of 23 years of brotherhood. And what I felt was, that's not me. The voice had the sound right, the pitch, the cadence, the nasal quality. But it was using Theo's voice the way a person uses a musical instrument, technically proficient, but missing the thing that made it alive. Theo never would have said, "You're not going to leave me out here, are you?" Not like that. Not as a guilt mechanism. Theo would have said something stupid, something irreverent. He would have made a joke about the cold, called me a name, laughed at himself. He would have been incapable of weaponizing our relationship even if his life depended on it, because that wasn't who he was. Whatever was outside my door had studied the frequency of his voice, but not the content of his character. I took my hand off the handle. I walked back to the table. I sat down. I picked up my pen. In my patrol log, beneath the entry for the transmission, I wrote, "New rule. It can replicate voice, but not personality. Listen for the person, not the sound. If the words feel designed to manipulate rather than communicate, it isn't who it claims to be." I added that to the paper the next morning. in my own handwriting, in the margin next to Rule 1, an 8th rule, born from a night I will carry for the rest of my life. The transmissions stopped at 4 a.m. as always. I did not open the door, but the next morning, when I stepped outside, I found something that made my stomach drop into my boots, my footprints in the snow, leading from the cabin door to the tree line, roughly 40 yards and stopping at the edge of the forest. The prints went out. They did not come back. I was wearing the same boots. I checked the soles. The tread pattern matched. I had been inside the cabin all night. I had not opened the door. I had not gone outside. I was certain of this the way I was certain of my own name, but the footprints were there. I stood on the porch and stared at them and felt something I'd never felt before in my professional career. Not fear. I'd been afraid before. This was something colder. The realization that the boundary between my decisions and its influence was not where I thought it was. That the door I hadn't opened, the handle I'd taken my hand off, maybe I had opened it. Maybe I had walked out there, in some state I couldn't remember, drawn by a voice wearing my brother's face. Or maybe it had made the prints itself, wearing my tread pattern the way it wore Theo's voice. I didn't know which possibility was worse. Spring came late that year. The snow held until mid-April. When the fire road finally cleared enough for vehicle traffic, District sent a 2-person trail crew up for early season maintenance, and I almost wept at the sight of other human faces. One of them was a woman named Kira Odenbach. She was a seasonal trail technician, 24, working her 3rd summer in the North Cascades. Fit, capable, irreverent in the way that field workers are when they're good at their jobs and know it. She reminded me of Theo, which was both a comfort and a knife. The other was a man named Elliot Park, a few years older, quieter, methodical. He'd worked the adjacent district the previous season and had requested a transfer to Mineral Creek. When I asked him why, he gave me a look I recognized, the look of someone who'd seen something they couldn't file. Heard this district had its own way of doing things, he said. That was all he said. They were only with me for 3 weeks, clearing deadfall, repairing water bars, prepping the trails for the summer season. During that time, nothing happened. The forest was cooperative. The radio was silent at night. The wildlife was noisy and present and normal. I started sleeping again. 4 hours, then 5, then almost 6. On the 11th day, Kira went to clear a drainage culvert on a spur trail about 2 miles east of the station. She went alone. I was fixing a section of split rail fence near the trailhead, and Elliot was hauling gravel for a trail repair a half-mile in the opposite direction. She radioed at 1:15 p.m. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the tight wire underneath it. Rowan, I'm at the culvert on Spur 7. I need you to come here. Don't bring Elliot, just you. I dropped what I was doing, drove the truck to the spur trail junction, hiked the 1/4 mile in. Kira was standing in the middle of the trail. She wasn't moving. She was staring at something off to the right side, just at the edge of the tree line. A woman was standing between the trees. She was about 30 feet from the trail, partially obscured by undergrowth, wearing what looked like hiking clothes, synthetic pants, a fleece jacket, trail runners. Her hair was dark, pulled back. She was facing us. She was standing completely, absolutely still. She's been there since I arrived, Kira said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 20 minutes. She hasn't moved. She hasn't blinked. I asked if she needed help and she didn't respond. I asked 3 times. I looked at the woman. She was looking back. Her eyes were open, her expression neutral, not blank, not aggressive, not afraid. Neutral, the way a mannequin is neutral, present without participating. Kira, I need you to walk back to the truck with me. She might need help. She might be in shock or... Kira, walk with me, now. Something in my tone did what my words couldn't. She turned and walked with me. I walked backward for the first 50 yards, keeping my eyes on the figure. It never moved, not a shift in weight, not a turn of the head. At 50 yards, the trail curved and the trees blocked my line of sight. We reached the truck. I drove us back to the station. Kira was quiet the entire way, her hands gripping her knees. At the station, I told her about the rules. Not all of them, just the ones relevant to what she'd seen. Rule 7. I told her about the figure at the tree line, the flashlight protocol, the backward walking. She listened without interrupting. That wasn't a person, she said when I finished. No. What was it? I don't know. That's not good enough. I know. But it's honest. Kira didn't go back to that spur trail. Neither did I. The three of us finished the remaining trail work on the western routes and stayed clear of the eastern drainages. When Kira and Elliot left at the end of their rotation, Kira shook my hand and held it for a beat longer than professional courtesy required. "Follow your rules," she said, "and write new ones when you need to." I told her I would. The summer passed. Hikers came and went. I did my job. I helped people, answered questions, maintained trails, ran patrols. In daylight, the Cascades were exactly what the postcards promised. Soaring ridgelines, alpine meadows, glacier-fed streams the color of cold steel. A place of staggering, indifferent beauty. At night, I followed the rules. There were more incidents. I won't describe all of them. This account is already longer than I intended, and some things I've written in my logs that I'm not ready to say out loud. But I'll tell you this, it didn't stop. It adapted. The radio transmissions became less frequent but more targeted. The silence events happened in new locations, including once on a trail I'd considered completely safe. The footprints appeared twice more, once leading toward the Thompson Ridge drainage, once leading directly to the cabin door from the Treeline, as if something had walked to my door and stopped. The prints always matched my boots. In August, I found a hiker's journal in a day-use area. Not a lost item. It was placed on a picnic table, open to a specific page, weighted down with a stone. The page had a single entry, dated 3 days prior, in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Heard singing from the drainage last night." Couldn't make out the words, but it was beautiful. Going to find the source today. Don't understand why the ranger told me to stay on the trail. The singing is clearly coming from a real person. I checked the trailhead registers. A solo hiker had signed in 3 days earlier. Name, Marcus Weber. Intended route, PCT northbound, 3-day trip. Expected return 2 days ago. He never signed out. Search and rescue found his pack a half-mile down an unmaintained path toward the drainage. His water bottles were full. His food was untouched. His boots were placed neatly on a rock beside the trail. Number 18. I reported it to district as a standard missing person. I did not mention the journal entry. I did not mention the singing. I filed the journal in the station's records alongside 11 years of things I could not explain and could not share. It's been 11 years now. I'm still here. I'm still at Mineral Creek. People ask me why I stay. Dale asked me the last time we spoke. My mother asks me every time I call. I don't have a clean answer. Part of it is duty. Someone has to work this district, and whoever replaces me will face the same things with less preparation. Part of it is stubbornness, the same trait that made me a good ranger and a difficult brother and an impossible person to argue with. Part of it is something I don't fully understand and probably never will, a feeling that leaving would be a kind of surrender and not to the forest, to the thing in the forest. If I leave, it still hunts, it still calls, it still learns. The difference is that there's no one here who knows what it is, who knows the rules, who can steer hikers away from the drainages and check the registers and listen to the radio at 2 a.m. without reaching for the transmit button. Last September, a new seasonal ranger arrived for the autumn rotation. His name was Jesse. He was 29, former military, quiet and capable, with the specific kind of alertness that combat veterans carry in their posture. He'd done 2 seasons in the Gifford Pin Show and requested a transfer north. On his 3rd evening, I sat him down at the table, put 2 mugs of coffee between us, slid a folded piece of paper across the surface. The paper was softer now. The folds were deeper. The handwriting of Carla Brask, Len Ouellette, Dale Pressler, and my own covered both sides, a palimpsest of survival written in blue ink, pencil, red pen, and the ballpoint I'd used to add my contributions in the margins. "Read this," I said. Jesse unfolded the paper. Jesse. He read it slowly. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me with exactly the expression I must have given Dale a decade ago. Half skeptical, half alarmed, entirely uncertain whether to laugh. "Is this real? Does it look like I'm joking?" He studied my face. Whatever he found there changed something behind his eyes. "Tell me," he said. So I told him. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. I told him about the silence and the footprints and the radio. I told him about Marnie Soto. I told him about the figure Kira saw at the Treeline. I told him about Marcus Weber's journal and the singing from the drainage and the boots placed neatly on rocks by people who were never found. I did not tell him about Theo's voice, not yet. That comes later, when he's ready, when he's followed the rules long enough to understand why someone might almost break them. He asked me what Dale had said, that the rules were a framework, not a fortress, that there would be things the paper didn't cover, that when those things happened, his job was to survive them and write down what he learned. How many rules are there now, he asked. 12, I said. There were 7 when I got here. He looked at the paper again. Then he folded it carefully, matching the existing creases, and put it in his breast pocket. Good man. I want to finish by saying something to anyone listening who's planning to hike the North Cascades, or who has hiked them, or who lives near them. These mountains are beautiful. They are some of the most pristine wilderness left in the lower 48. You should visit them. You should experience the alpine meadows and the glacial valleys and the silence of old-growth forest at dawn, which is one of the most peaceful sounds, or absences of sound, that the natural world offers. But stay on the trails. Sign the registers. Tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. If a ranger tells you to avoid a certain area, avoid it. Don't ask why. Don't assume they're being overcautious. There are things in these mountains that have been here longer than the trails, longer than the Forest Service, longer than the name we've given the range itself. And if you're camped in the backcountry some night and you hear a voice calling from the tree line, a voice that knows your name, that sounds like someone you love, that begs you to come closer, to help, to just step past the edge of the firelight for one moment, don't. Stay where you are, close your eyes, wait for morning, and trust that somewhere in the dark there's a ranger listening to the same voice, following the same rules, holding the same line. We're out here. We're doing our jobs. Some of us are just doing a version of the job that doesn't appear in any manual.